Santa around here?
Oh, I don't know. It would be in okay.
On the computer, if you can switch to the opening screen, let's see if I get the opening screen. And then if you switch to cam one, and then if you switch to cam one, are you on cam one or cam plus?
Oh, it's cam plus the slide.
Okay, so cam plus slide you're on now. Perfect. When Dave connects his laptop, we
Yeah.
should see the slide. And then if you switch to cam only. Okay, so you're on cam only now. Perfect. I hear audio. And then can you switch to the ending screen right here? Perfect. All right, so let's, Michael, just switch back to the opening screen, and I'll have Dave send out it's bhstv.bethpage.ws. Perfect. All right, so let's, Michael, just switch
Just
back
gotta
to the
change
opening
some
screen,
setting
and I'll
on
have
that.
Very low number. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third of our 3 parent forums for us here at Bethpage School District to share with you and the community all of our reopening of school plans. Today I have with me 3 important members of our school district administrative team. Michael Spence, our Assistant Superintendent for Instruction, Scott Harrington, our Assistant Superintendent for Business, and Andrew Choi, our Director of Technology. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. This forum being conducted here live on YouTube will be recorded, and as has been for the previous 2 forums, they will be archived on our website for family and community members to review at any time. In addition, tonight's forum, the presentation portion of the forum, will be following the same slide deck that's posted on our website if you care to follow along. Again, this is the same presentation for the 3 events for those to each have an opportunity to view. But at the conclusion of the presentation, we will be taking questions and do our best to go through the series of questions that the viewers will post from this point forward. Mr. Harrington and Mr. Spence are going to be going through the email address that we have for this set of questions. The questions can be sent in to returntoschool@bethpage.ws. It's very important to note that the presentation has been designed with the tremendous influx of questions that had come in from our original communication with you the previous Thursday. And our administrative team, all of our assistant superintendents, all of our principals spent Thursday through the entire weekend working to read every question that was sent in. And this presentation, again, was designed knowing those questions in advance. So if you'll be patient with me and as we go through the presentation and listen in, and then along the way, if you have a question regarding something that I may not have covered to your satisfaction, please feel free to share it. And at the conclusion, we'll spend some time with Mr. Harrington and Mr. Spence posting the questions for me so Mr. Choi and I can run through them, and we'll answer them here for you. And again, spend some time to try to make sure that all of you are aware thoroughly of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So at this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Choi to share my screen, and we go to the presentation portion. Make sure that all of you are aware thoroughly of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So at this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Choi to share. And as you know, the parent forums have occurred once each for the last 3 days, the 17th, the 18th, and 19th. And at each of these forums, we are sharing this information. It's very thorough, and it does refer to our reopening school plans that are posted again on our district website. Sharing this information is very thorough, and it does refer to above all else, the health and safety of our students and staff is what drives all of the decisions that are being put into this very complex, unprecedented problem that we have to solve, which is how do we get our students educated thoroughly to the degree that they require under these conditions. Unprecedented problem that we and so we have had a large group collaborating for many months to work towards getting our students back to school as safely as possible under these conditions, while meeting the academic and social and emotional goals that are so important to the progress and development of each of our students, regardless of their age. While meeting the academic and social and emotional goals. So we began with a large return to school advisory committee that consisted of the variety of stakeholders in the community to help us make these very difficult and important decisions. The Bethpage Board of Education, all of our district administration, all of our leadership of the Bethpage Congress of Teachers, the Bethpage teacher assistants, PTA council, whom I meet with regularly, every week or every other week, and keep in touch with what is going on in the neighborhood. And I know how hard they work to share information from me with all of you and how much they bring many of your concerns back to me as well. Our clerical unit and custodial unit and our medical advice comes from the chief of the pediatric intensive care unit at Cohen's Children's Medical Center from the Northwell Health Systems. And this person was with us each and every meeting to provide very important advice, feedback on the types of plans that we were looking to put in place. And then lastly, all of you as parents who took the time to complete our parent survey and share the valuable feedback as to how the community feels with all of this uncertainty and all of the difficulties that we're going to face. So let me share a little bit of what we received from all of you. Thank you to the over 1,800 of you who participated in our survey. And since each survey was able to have more than one child in your household listed, it represents over 2,300 students. And as you see, it's a very good representation, even balanced representation of each of our buildings. And with the main question being how comfortable you'll be sending your children to school in the fall if the health and safety measures are in place to the most extent possible. And as you can see, and with the main question being how comfortable 80% of you felt reasonably or very comfortable doing so. And that helped us understand to what degree the community would respond to some of our plans. 80% of you felt additional questions in dealing with whether you would send them or not. And that helped us understand to what and how that might impact our decisions. And how you are feeling about having to send your children to school with masks being worn, since masks now have become such a key component to the control of the spread of the virus, and how you are feeling about and are required to enter so many of the buildings throughout our communities. And then lastly, our transportation, because it's a key component for our school program to get your children here. And with our eligibility requirements and how many of you are participants, how would you feel about sending your child on a bus that requires you to wear a mask, even though we might not be able to keep social distancing at all times, where that is an impossibility in transportation circles. But all of these plans require all of us to pull together because we're going to need your help tremendously. That is an impossibility. There are going to be items that are going to challenge all of us, and your willingness to comply, help, adjust, are going to be paramount to the success of what happens inside the schools. Challenge all of us, and your willingness to comply, help, adjust, are going to. So the guiding principles for planning have been the health and safety of the student, staff, and the community above all else. But we do have to do our best to provide a full, robust educational experience the way we always do under normal circumstances. We have to be consistent with the best practices in health and safety, and all of those continue to change as we evolve in dealing with a crisis such as this. The academic, social, emotional needs are always, again, what allows our children to reach their potential, and these need to be met. But all of our plans need to be, regardless in what conditions we're in, predictable and sustainable over particular periods of time, and able to be managed to transition, because there will be times outside of the control of Bethpage that we're going to have to respond to. Because there will be times outside of. So as a reminder, we received our guidance on how to start looking to reopen schools in the middle of July from the governor. And our schools are able to be opened if we are in phase 4 of the reopening, where our infection rate in our region remains below 5% over a 14-day average, and currently we're hovering at or below 1%, so this is good news. As a reminder, if the regional infection rate rose to 9% or above, all school buildings in the region would be closed. But it is very important to note that the Academy of American Pediatrics and the CDC strongly advocate to get our children back to school in person if you can do it in a very healthy and safe way. And so New York State has decided that schools can open. But in making these plans and deciding which plan to choose, in a very healthy. It's super important to note that we have to be able to have these plans adjusted.
Can you just check?
But in making
if
these
you don't
plans
have
and
yesterday's
deciding which
running
plan
behind
to
it 'cause there's
choose,
echo.
I'm sorry, let me hang on one second, folks. We have to be able to have these plans adjusted.
So if you just close
Okay.
Mr. Steiner, are there any YouTube links?
I did. Sorry about that. It seems that there may have been some feedback, so my apologies. Thank you to whomever outside is letting Mr. Spence know that with feedback was present, so now we should have that squared away.
Live TV, Mr. Schneider.
Tough to be live on TV. I am not cut out for it. So sorry about that, folks. But as I was saying, it's very important to know that so many things have changed, even from the July 13th guidance to today, in 4 short weeks. And we've had to make sure that we have the ability to make small adjustments and changes as circumstances change and recommendations change, as the science behind things changes, as plans around us, since we're all working on these things, come out and different ideas are shared. And so we are continuously looking to update our plans in some of the fine details, and we'll always do so in order to ensure that we're doing the best we can at that time. But at this time, Bethpage schools will be open K-12 for all of our in-person plans, which includes K-12 students 5 days a week. But our plans include some very important safety measures that are to note here. The safety measures of all consequence are generally looked at as social distancing, barriers, and masks. Only one is required, but all 3 here are in place at all of our instructional areas. All masks are going to be required at all times for students and staff, although mask breaks will be given. And in some cases, some of the classes that are larger are being given different spaces. In other words, the principals are working to ensure that the larger sections of classes are in the larger spaces available. So some of your traditional classrooms that, if you think of a high school as a social studies wing, etc., that might not be the case this year. So that we can maximize the capacity of each room, since so many different rooms, they're not standardized here, are able to have more children, those larger classes that can fit more students with social distancing will be put in those areas. And on some grade levels, in all 5 of our buildings, we have classes that require some students who can't fit within that capacity on a very occasional rotating basis go to an additional area that is managed by a licensed teacher in order to make sure that they can be educated alongside. Now this is being done in a way that I'll describe in a little bit. Simply if we had all 100% of our students present, and in that we know is not going to be the case. But again, the health and safety protocols are very clear. You need to have at least one of these in place. We are requiring all 3. Masks will be required. Masks are face coverings. I will say for this evening, there's a new controversy on the gaiters being worn. We haven't made a determination yet as to whether they'll be applicable, because there's some new evidence to suggest that gaiters should not be worn. Again, we have yet to determine if that's the case here in Bethpage. But as always, that is for the moment, and things can change. And then again, the mask breaks will be provided always while maintaining social distancing. Let me give you a quick peek at some of our classrooms and what they might look like, where desks are 6 feet apart. But you'll notice that there are different things here on the desk in the second picture. The barriers are staged here, a set of barriers. You'll notice the black hinges, but you see very little else, which is good. They're not so overtly in the way. These will be secured to the desk with small brackets that are stuck to the tabletops in order to keep them secure and not worry too much about students bumping into them and knocking them over. But you'll also notice in our classrooms that some of the fun things like the carpet areas, the rocking chairs, some of the things that we make our classrooms wonderful will not be present this year in order to allow us to have more students in front of us, which is such a key component, again, to the teaching and learning process for all of our students. Once again, masks are going to be required for all students and staff and will be enforced by our code of conduct. In other words, here are the rules. We need you to follow the rules. And if you don't follow the rules, each building has its typical series of conversations with students about the consequences, because it's another form of following the rules or insubordination if we're having issues. But we know how eager we are to get all of our students back, and the parents are to get them back. So we're going to ask, of course, for your cooperation and support there. And they'll be needed for arrival and dismissal and hallway passing and bathrooms and common areas. But we do have breaks designed within our plan. And those breaks will consist of times of up to 15 minutes when social distancing is in place and behind barriers, and only be done at the instruction of the teacher, the teacher who will determine the right time and place to conduct these. And as a guide, we are currently working with the notion of elementary students getting breaks of twice an hour per hour of instruction, and once a period in secondary during our 9-period day. And I'll get into more detail of why the 15 minutes is such a key part of our mask breaks in a moment. We are required to provide daily health screenings to all of our staff and students. And that is going to be done at home. It is heavily suggested, the guidance, that we do this where you take your temperature at home, complete the questionnaire at home prior to even trying to come to the building. This way we know, as parents attest to the fact that they've completed this, that we have your assurance and an opportunity to do so before you even attempt to come and mix with other children. And while we can do this in a form like a typical survey, as we've sent out before, we are working with other third parties who are trying to develop apps that all they include are your child's name, school and grade, and your email address as a parent to complete, because we want it to be as easy for you to do each and every day, since it's a new practice for all parents. And we also want to make sure that we have an easier way to track down those who do not complete it. And current surveys only tell us who has completed it. So we are going to finalize that as we get closer to the start of school. But as you see, no student with a temperature of greater than 100 will be permitted in school. So more information about our cohorts. It is highly suggested we do our best to do as much cohorting as possible to the greatest extent possible. And we can do that to a very large degree in our K-6, where students will be grouped and not travel to classes, but teachers will travel to them. But in order to do that and have all of our students in at the same time, again, if we had 100% attendance every day, which we already know is not happening, but at the time of this created presentation, before our parent survey, you see the grades in the buildings at the elementary level that couldn't fit all the students at once. And so we do have plans to have small numbers of students in each class of those grades who would come out periodically, once a week maybe, again, not yet determined, and work in another area with a small group, again, from their class within their grade, with a licensed teacher to get the lesson that might be going on in the room next door, some of the specials, and then maybe come back that day and somebody else goes out. Or maybe spend the whole day. The reason I can't give you specifics is because this would be part of our final planning once we know how many students will not be following along in person. So try to be a little patient with me if you can, as I know this has been a very difficult concept to visualize. And when students are rotated out, it will be done with everyone being given notice and understanding of where they're going. And while we recognize that we would prefer not to have children out of class, we know that it is the best way we can do this and get all of our students in the buildings at the same time and get them in front of our teachers each and every day. Students with IEPs or AIS or RTI services will be pulled out. Some of those services may push in, but they will travel to their small group or individual instruction as needed. All mandated services will be fulfilled. Band and orchestra will also have their lessons in small groups or individually, and of course larger spaces with social distancing in place. The middle school and high school will follow a regular 9-period day. It's something that we know is very important to be able to transition to the next phase if we are not able to stay all in for 5 days a week during the course of the year. So we'll be able to follow the period-by-period schedule easily. But each of our 2 buildings are working on bell schedules that have adjustments in it to allow more time between periods for the principals to allow students to pass in a more staggered way and reduce hallway congestion. At the middle school, we do have 1 grade being cohorted, which reduces the hallway traffic by 1/3 already. And then with all the directional lines and up-down staircases that are planned for, and having masks worn, and plenty of signage to remind students how to move throughout the hallways and adults around to help remind them, we do know that congestion in the hallway will be reduced dramatically. And that's the same for the high school, where certain grades may be released at certain times to reduce the movement. But we do know that congestion is going to be reduced dramatically by simply making it where all hallway lockers are not available. What is that going to do to your child's needs for school materials? The teachers and the administrators are still working on what that would look like based upon how the teachers are going to go about working with their curriculum. So that specific information will be forthcoming, but surely closer to the start of school, as we do have a little bit of time for that to be worked out. Transportation is, of course, an important component, as we said, and our buses are being routed to reduce capacity, which already increases the amount of busing that we need. All students will be required to wear a mask at all times on the bus. And on those very few occasions, if you do have a medical issue and that you've worked out with your building principal, transportation may be able to or will be able to route your child on a bus with social distancing in place, of which is going to be a small number applicable. Many questions about sanitizing the school buses. The school buses will be sanitized between the routes, but it will not be sanitized from high school to middle school to elementary school. There's no time to do so. Transportation is very important to note that we route our buses with, again, elementary schools can hold up to 66 students. If you were to try to have social distancing on a bus, it would be limited to 12 students. So that more than quadruples our transportation budget in the many, many millions. But also, even if we had the resources to do so, it could not be accomplished because the bus companies do not have the capacity available. They don't have the free buses or the drivers to fulfill that for any district, let alone many districts. So again, reduced capacity on the buses, and by the indication of so many of you, over 50%, who said you would not be utilizing the bus, and our survey is out on that as well, that will help us make the bus far less capacity than typical. Arrival and dismissal is something that we have now out in our building plans. And I should have mentioned earlier that our specific building plans that may have a number of your questions being answered more specifically than I can here tonight are all posted on the district website. Excuse me. And as mentioned, all of our plans are subject to change when we get better information. One of those bits of information, again, is going to be those who choose to have their children pick their all virtual option. And based on those final tallies, some things like arrival and dismissal procedures may change based on the numbers and density of grade levels. But I wanted to give you an example of what currently is in place at JFK. And knowing that this is going to be a challenge for all of us and the added cooperation we need from you, we do want to note that the hope is that as many of you in these different grade levels can follow plans as you see, with a staggered arrival time at the middle school, where traffic can build up terribly on Broadway and trying to turn in from the two directions. But obviously we have situations, for example, when you have two children in different grades. So we know that's an issue. But the more of you that can follow along with plans like this, the easier time we're going to have in fulfilling it to make sure that your children are in school timely, safely, and ready to learn. Originally, this, again, from our first one, the plan was to be posted tomorrow, but that was from Monday, so now it is posted. Lunch. If you ask any middle school student, they'll tell you the most important class of the day. It will not be as much fun as it used to be. And in particular, K to 6 will be eating in their classrooms to start the school year. And grades 7 to 12 will be assigned areas where social distancing will be met, especially because masks are not required while you are at your seat and eating. When you've finished eating, the masks are required to return. But we're going to help make sure that it's easier for those that wish to utilize our food service with our partner Aramark, who will prepare a series of prepackaged meal options each day. And K to 6 parents are going to be able to order those in advance, which will help us dramatically because of the need to get the students their meals without having them go pick them up where we can. And that will be then automatically linked to your account. Schoolbucks, right, Mr. Harrington?
Yeah.
On Schoolbucks. 7 to 12 will be a grab and go, but those lines will be reduced dramatically because each of the areas in which the students are going to be located will have a cart where the prepackaged meal options will be available for pickup. So this will be a pretty smooth process and not end up with the large lines because the choices basically are gone. But there'll be a couple of options each day. The early portion of the year, it will all be cold lunch items. And if all is going smoothly, we're prepared to work with Aramark to bring in some hot items that are also prepackaged. Recess is going to be vital to keeping the mental wellness of our students intact. And we do have plans for our elementary students to go out as often as possible, not just associated with lunch alone. But it's going to look differently as they're going to be in designated areas away from other classes that only their class can attend. Playgrounds are currently open and will remain open and be cleaned as much as possible. Tents are in consideration here. There's a very important caveat with tents. Tents above a 20 by 20, which isn't terribly big, require building permits and safety measures that resemble what you would need if you were to open a new building in your school. And unfortunately, that makes it impossible for us to consider the really large tents that might be thought of in times like this. But we are working to get a number of tents at each location so that in inclement weather we can still be able to rotate children outdoors as much as possible. We know JFK students love to be outside as well and have their areas that are similar. And this is going to be a great challenge for our physical education department across the land to develop outdoor activities that are safe and enjoyable without the sharing of equipment and the mixing of children, which is so counter to how schools are typically run. And so we recognize the difficulties here. We will be using products in our cleaning that meet the EPA's criteria against this virus. The product is called Virex. That's the gold standard in schools. And we have that in plenty of capacity there. And we will follow all the hygiene and sanitation requirements as set by the CDC and the Department of Health. In addition, the Board of Education has allowed me to secure additional staff to help clean the buildings more thoroughly, and additional cleaning equipment that makes that cleaning more efficient and effective each day. But very important for all of us is to understand that hand hygiene is going to be paramount here. And hand sanitizing stations are installed in all classrooms, and children will be directed to utilize it each and every time they exit and enter the rooms. Plus, freestanding hand sanitizer in high traffic areas so they can get their hands on it more readily. Because hand sanitizing is so key and hand washing is so hard to do for the 20 seconds that's required, our medical advice was to make sure that, again, the hand sanitizing stations are our biggest benefit here. Our bathrooms are going to be frequently cleaned additionally than normal. We'll try to limit one student per bathroom per time. And part of that is to log those visits in case of need for understanding where children have been. And at the middle school and high school during passing, those bathrooms will be closed to control the flow of students to the right places. During lunch, those that are sharing areas in 7 to 12 will have lunch areas wiped down in between. And all throughout the day, high-touch areas such as door handles and handrails in nurses' offices will be continuously cleaned. Each night we'll have a thorough cleaning of our buildings, including the desks and the classrooms and the shared spaces. And there are many questions about our ventilation. All of our unit ventilators in the district have been upgraded and filters have been replaced. This was also in conjunction with, coincidentally, an energy performance upgrade that we were in the process of working with. So it allowed us to focus on this quickly and very effectively. We don't have central air conditioning in the district. And so windows and doors will remain open throughout the school day. And those doors I refer to are indoor doors. The outdoor doors will remain as normal, where we keep our lockout mode at all times for safety measures. But the CDC recommends that if you do have your classrooms with air conditioners, which are in place due to medical issues for a student or staff member, that they should be used for the needs of those issues that are the reasons behind the air conditioner being installed. Many questions about can we use fans to circulate air, and the CDC recommends that you do not do that to circulate air within the room. It is better to have the windows and door open to allow that air to flow. And our air filtration system in our ventilators will maximize outside fresh air through the intake and working from 2 hours before the arrival of our students until 2 hours after they depart. Earlier I talked about why the mask breaks were going to consist of no more than 15 minutes at a time. It's very important to note that contact tracing now, these definitions, these guidelines are constantly evolving, and the most recent ones that have come down recently are the following, because in the past we would simply note that contact tracing would be as per the Department of Health, but they've given us more information to work with now. And to understand that when you are in the vicinity of someone with a confirmed case of COVID, it doesn't now mean that everybody's impacted. the way we may have thought in the past. And that some of the panic that we've had to deal with in the past with much higher infection rates is now able to be thought of very differently, that we're in a much different state. And so close contact is defined as being within a person who's positive for within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. This is very good news because the Department of Health has now stated that your contact tracing practices may not end up impacting as many people, forcing them on to quarantine as you would think. And it may not impact your buildings having to close as quickly as you think. And it means that students passing each other, or staff members passing each other in the hallways, or staff that have to work more closely with the student to help them, are not automatically considered impacted by a positive case. And so that gives us a lot of confidence at the high school and middle school level during our passing, because that casual passing of people is not a high risk for transmission, because close contact, again, is defined as being within 6 feet of a positive case for more than 15 minutes, or have direct touching of those people, or sharing their food, or being exposed to them sneezing or coughing or talking at you or on you, again, within that 6 feet. And so the contact tracing plans are all going to be in conjunction with the Department of Health, especially Nassau County is going to be the one working with us. And while no one in the schools are required to be trained in contact tracing protocols, all of our nurses already are, and many of our administrators will be soon. And our nurses are developing the protocols that our teachers will be not only following, but understanding to help identify COVID-related symptoms. And then how are those students that are identified by staff going to be dealt with within the building? Those very specific processes are still being worked on, since the Department of Health has yet to give us more clarity on it and how that might relate to our buildings. But we do have isolation rooms for those students who are identified. Our nurses are the ones creating our videos and documents on all of the training that goes into COVID-related matters, such as hygiene, social distancing, proper use of masks, etc. And while those items are readily available online from other sources, our staff felt it was very important to provide a familiar face in each building that students and staff are comfortable and confident with, that can provide that information to them. And so they're working to develop those public service announcement type of training videos. And so if there is a case that has to be reviewed of a possible positive or confirmed positive, we'll figure out how to specifically deal with it once we deal with the Department of Health in Nassau County. And then who gets removed will be based on those close contact issues. So let me give you, it's a bit complicated here in this particular slide. We do have in our reopening plans a separate document that talks to contact tracing and testing. And it has a larger table that's not helpful to put on a slide here, but it'll give you greater detail on some of the specifics. But let me try to run you through a couple of things here to note, because this is a lot of questions regarding this. Confirmed case is someone who has been tested and is confirmed through a doctor and will stay home until further notice. If someone has symptoms and they get confirmed, they follow that same confirmed case procedure. But if somebody has symptoms and they get tested, and that test is now negative, once they have no fever for 24 hours, without using medications, and have no symptoms, that person can return to school. But if you have symptoms and you've not been tested, you begin the clock of staying home for 14 days since the first symptoms were noted. And only after 14 days and a combination of that and no fever for 24 hours and no symptoms can that person return to school. If you go home with symptoms, and we hope that all will try to get seen by a doctor, and the doctor determines that it's not COVID, with or without a test, but that it's now something else, then you can follow those policies for what happens when you have strep throat, for what happens when you have an ear infection, for what happens when you have the flu even. But again, let's take a look at what is the definition of close contact. And now the real question about the following. If I am a student in someone's class and one of my classmates is confirmed ill and I've been in close contact with that student, I become a close contact person that has to be quarantined for 14 days. But then I go home and I have my younger brother, and the question is my younger brother now required to quarantine? And the answer is, if I do not have symptoms as the close contact, my brother becomes a secondary contact and is not required to remain quarantined and can continue to stay in school. That gives us again great hope that if there are any small outbreaks in the building, that we'll be able to handle it and limit the number of students and staff that are impacted. It also means, and based on what we've heard earlier this week, because we have such intense safety measures in all of our buildings, with the masks, with the barriers, and with our desks apart, it also means that if somebody is positive in a classroom, it is not necessarily shutting down the class completely. That will all be based upon the Department of Health, but all of our safety measures help reduce the distance of what close contact means, and it helps us allow our schools to remain open longer for sure. Once again, our contact tracing plan, separated out from within our larger plan, will be posted later this evening for some specifics, and you can follow the chart to give you a sense of what might be included in some of your questions. There are many questions about testing. Most importantly to note, the school itself, any of our Bethpage schools, none of them will be conducting any testing. And then whether or not we're requiring testing to be conducted prior to arrival, and the answer is it's actually recommended not to. And the main reasons for that are, number one, they don't believe there's a capacity for it anyway. And if it were even capable, all of the testing that you would have accomplished would be invalidated by the time from which you were tested to the time you're in school, being that there's considerable mixing going on potentially outside of school prior to arrival. But any family, any staff member that needs assistance in finding testing, we'll be working with the Department of Health in Nassau County to help facilitate that. And so the district is making available options for families to choose to go on our full distance learning plan, especially for those who have underlying health conditions for their children or family members at home. And so rather than risk that compromise, they wish to go to distance learning. That survey is out now, and I did ask for the deadline of today at 5, but I recognize that it would be helpful for you to have the rest of the evening. So please don't hesitate to, at the conclusion of this, to also fill that survey out. But it is very important for you to know that we need that survey ASAP. And here are the questions that really came up that were important in this area, and I know that many of you are posting these types of questions right now. Why do I need your commitment? I know the language was strong to say I needed you to commit for the school year, and that was intentional to get your attention to the need for us to have your commitment for an extended period of time so that we can properly plan. The actual numbers of people in every building each and every day is a key component to the plans in providing our safety measures. And so to have students bounce back and forth between in-person and virtual is an impossibility. And so we did ask you to commit to doing so for an extended period of time. And while the words in the email were that you would apply at each marking period, the reality is you'd get in at each marking period, but it means that we need time to prepare to let you back in. And at the same time, if you started in and wanted to go out, I need you to understand that I need time to properly handle what you would do on the outside, that going to remote learning at moment's notice also puts us at a massive disadvantage within our buildings and what our teachers are attempting to do. So there are many questions that have been asked about, why can't I go if I don't feel comfortable after a week or a few days? And the answer is, in reality, can I stop you from staying home? I can't, but I'm not going to be prepared to work with you properly if that's how you choose to handle it. So we are really asking for you to think deeply about the choice that we are making available to you, and we would hope that you understand how difficult this already is. So we want a little bit of consistency with who's going to be with us and who's going to be at home to help us already do what's more difficult than ever been tried in the history of education. So once again, if you can complete that by this evening, tomorrow morning, I will be working with the entire administrative team to look at those students and figure out, so now how does that impact our plans? And what changes do we need to make? And how are we going to get ready to now have our building principals communicate with each one of you in providing the necessary information about what's next? All of this is based on the fact that our social emotional health and wellness is so important to all of us. And in the 3 months that we had to be at home on distance learning, there were so many unintended negative consequences to that. And I just want to remind all of you listening that, again, it was 3 months that we had to complete that. We're responsible here now to get ready for 10 months of school. And the more that we're able to have our students in front of us, the more we're able to establish the relationships and the connections that are so important to unlocking the potential of our students. It's the secret sauce of what makes teachers do great things. And we know how much more difficult that is from a distance, and how many students and staff suffered through that. And regardless of whether you're in front of us or whether you're home on September return, we'll be sure to be working more on this part of our educational mission than the academic alone piece, because it's going to be such a long time since anyone has been in school, because there's going to be a lot of fear and anxiety and concern about returning under these very different conditions. And because your children are returning to school in front of new staff they've never met, as opposed to having worked with the teachers they had been with for 70% of the school year prior to our closing in March. And so the teachers and PPS staff and other members of our staff are all being prepared to handle that. And once again, because I'm asking for parents' commitments in our virtual choice, and because so many details are so different than a typical school year, I want to point out that student schedules are always now subject to change. And while this is true of any particular year, it rarely is needed. But during a global pandemic crisis, it may very well be needed. And so sometimes a grade level or a course may end up in a different location. It may be that you have to have a few more students in one class than in others because of the space requirements and capacities. And so please know that while we would choose not to if we could, and we hope not to do too much, the teacher of record is still subject to change. Secondary schools, we cannot take requests at this time since all of those details are locked in to our plans and what the capacities are of our courses and then the classrooms associated with those courses. And so we know at times there are questions about which electives we wish to be in, or even possibly changing the levels that we were in. But at this time we cannot honor that. And we'll work towards that later once school is able to be opened. The only exception at the secondary level would be, your child should be taking Italian and they were scheduled for French. That's an error. That's different. And again, that is something that would be very few to have to deal with. Or maybe they have the wrong science on their schedule, something like that. But we'll keep that to a minimum. A lot of questions regarding what are our electives or specials going to look like. Music departments across the country are going to be faced with a tremendous challenge on how to do this when students aren't in front of you at all. And then secondly, even when students are in front of you. As concerts from at this point are to be determined, which means they're postponed until further notice. Elementary school will still have our general music classes, but they will push in as opposed to traveling to the general music room. Our lesson program will continue unless you as a parent choose not to allow your child to be part of it. But there will be no more morning rehearsals at this time, and that can be reevaluated down the road. In secondary, our 6th grade students that are working in a cohort, every child will receive music appreciation now because the large bands and the large orchestra and chorus will not be able to meet. That's one of the compromises we need to make in order to make that happen. But all of our lesson programs will continue so that your children have the opportunity to have to progress in their musical instrument. Our 7 to 12s will try to use some of our larger spaces, but the requirements for band and chorus are 12 feet of distance, not 6. So imagine the type of space that we need to use, gymnasiums or outdoors, frankly, in order to accomplish this. But once again, instrumental lessons will be made available so that students can have that individual progress continue. Physical education will be outdoors at all costs aside from bad weather. And there may be some use of classrooms during those bad weather to do the type of mindfulness activities, yoga type activities, other spaces possibly to accomplish that. But we'll be assisted in that with no locker room use at all and no need to change your clothes. Make sure you come to school prepared for that day. But once again, as mentioned earlier, our physical educators are going to be challenged to come up with outdoor activities that are safe and enjoyable with limiting or no equipment required. Again, hard to imagine what we're going to do yet, but just remember in these plans, we are facing with the whole country dealing with this, not just Bethpage or even Nassau County. So there are tens of thousands of educators all thinking about the same types of things and how we're going to accomplish those goals. And that gives us a lot of hope and confidence that we'll be okay. Art is going to be pushed in as well. 7 to 12 would be typical in your schedule, but not necessarily in how you're organized in your classroom, as you'll all be working individually. But no art classes will share supplies. And field trips are currently postponed. Our extracurriculars are going to be evaluated after school begins because some may be conducive to others, to being virtual than others. Our AIS is currently on hold. And as you see at top, high school athletics are to be determined. As I sent to the public a number of weeks back, the start of the high school sports season has been pushed to September 21st. And although our great athletic director, Mr. Franchi, is the president of the Nassau County Athletic Directors Association, and he and I speak daily about this, neither of us are aware of any plans at this point on what is coming next. There's simply been no indication at this time, and that might actually be wise to wait and see what the start of school is like for everyone prior to any final determination. A lot of questions about, so how are we going to work towards filling in the gaps for students that may have had a difficult time during the spring? And that may be many. Most important thing in the elementary level is that our teachers have already begun working with our principals to have these deep, intense conversations about, from one grade to a next, about where did they finish off, how successful were they during that time, as a group, as a grade, as individual students, to help our next group plan well on how to address their needs. We have a lot of summer support in place through Mr. Spence's office with our math packets and summer assignments and summer reading. But we do recognize that that is a program that requires a lot of self-motivation to be a part of. But for everyone, Bethpage has a number of very important tools to help us determine how we're going to understand where our students' levels are. The use of our NWEA that your children in K-8 will have throughout. In many cases, again, our 1-8 will have a history of. Our Achieve 3000 in grades 3-8 with our level setting to see again where they are currently versus where they left off. Fountas and Pinnell, our ST Math and Writers Workshop programs give us a lot of opportunity to determine where the gaps may be. Extra help is something that is yet to be determined, because before and after school activities right now are meant to be off until further notice. So there's something we are still working on, and when I have more information we will share it. But we want it to be very transparent in the fact that some questions we just simply don't have all the answers to yet. Mr. Spence has spearheaded a tremendous amount of professional development during the course of the summer, just to give you a good idea of what types of engagement that staff has had. And almost all of these opportunities are led by our own staff, our greatest resource. And we're appreciative of the efforts they put in for the time that it takes to help us. And at the bottom right, you'll see extensive curriculum work in K-12. And all of that curriculum work has been designed with this crisis in mind. And so that staff are able to better utilize the tools that are now in play more regularly or more necessarily in their classrooms and interacting with your children than they may have been prior to the closing of school in March. And so we thank him for that and all of our teachers for their efforts there. Sorry, before I finish in that area, I just wanted to please note though one important thing. No matter what we do, because of the conditions, our staff is being put in a position that has never been attempted before, and where we have our students in front of you already working in conditions that are less than optimal, where they're separated from one another behind barriers, where group work is no longer applicable. Collaboration is going to be very difficult. And also managing those that are following at home. Teachers are dedicated professionals, but no one has had to do that before. And we want to make sure everybody understands that we'll do it to the best of our ability, but it will never resemble what we had prior to the COVID crisis. And there will be many bumps in the road, but we are all going to work giving our best effort together to make sure that when we start, it will be in one way, but by the time we finished, it will be far better than that. And that's again going to take a lot of patience and understanding and support from all of us. And so we're grateful for the amount of work that's being put into the preparations for the school year. And so those on distance learning, and whether we are there now, partway through, at the end, it will resemble a typical school day. A secondary school schedule is built on 9 periods. Each period, your children would be logged on to Google Classroom and Google Meet to interact with their teacher. The specifics of that interaction are still yet to be determined. Again, as I described, this is a very difficult task, and how that's going to look is still under construction. But they are responsible for period-by-period attendance. Our attendance policy will be intact, as will our grading policy. None of that is being adjusted now that we're starting the new school year fresh. But our distance learning needs may have a range. The one that we all believe may be needed at some point, and if we're wrong, that's a wonderful thing, is that if the infection rate increases to a point that's been indicated of 9% over a 7-day average, all school buildings on Long Island will be closed. But otherwise, we may need distance learning to be implemented if a class has been deemed in close contact and the whole class goes home, a grade because of a wider spread contact, or even a whole school to allow a period of time to pass before we're all back in. But the key is we don't know when we'd need that, but we need to be ready to implement that. And our plans are built to allow for that. And so as part of all of this, of what's more to do, we've been working on our distance learning plan that Mr. Spence posted the other day, which is a small portion of what was in the larger plan, but easier for you to get access to and follow. Our contact tracing plans and testing plans that I described earlier that will be up later this evening, that our Executive Director of PPS, Lisa Lucchese, has handled, along with our Assistant Superintendent for Business, Mr. Harrington. And tonight concludes the third, will conclude the third of our parent forums. I do meet with the staff periodically, and I met with them last week and I met with them earlier today to spend time with them, to review our plans, to take questions, to try to help them understand what we are putting in place, for me to understand their concerns and make sure we do everything we can to work with those. But please remember, none of this works without your help. All of our plans mean nothing unless all of Bethpage pulls together to complete them successfully. But one thing we know about Bethpage is we come together and do great things all the time. And so we're very confident that we can do this as well. Please, please remember that what happens off our site, off of our campuses, will have as much impact on our success as what happens here on school grounds. Again, we are incredibly confident that the safety measures that are in place here in Bethpage schools are going to make our buildings safer than any other indoor locations that you would ever visit. More than the supermarket, Home Depot, Costco, any restaurant. And so we have great confidence that what happens inside our schools are going to help make sure that our children are able to learn and be here in front of us for as long as possible, so that the established relationships, routines, foundational skills are in place in case things change and that we need to make a transition to a different plan. So again, while we can, we hope to make sure that is being fulfilled. So once again, each of our buildings have a more detailed plan highlighting a number of these areas that are specific to them. So I do ask that you spend a little time, if you have further questions that are more building specific, to go to those questions, those documents rather. And if you have deeper questions that are very school specific, your principals are available to reach out to and willing to deal with your concerns at all times. But together we will be able to do this because, as I said, Bethpage can pull things off that other communities may not be able to. Because we are Bethpage, so I hope that the presentation that answers many of your questions, at this point we're complete, so I'll ask Mr. Choi to turn back over. And what we'll do now is, Mr. Spence and Mr. Harrington have been working feverishly to put together a series of questions that you've sent in during the course of this presentation. And I'll try to go through a number of them with you to clarify some of our points on our plan. You have instruction first, or we have health and safety? You have health and safety? Okay, fine. Will the grades that are possible overflow may require small group rooms be notified prior to the start of school? The question is absolutely. Once we determine the number of students in attendance and what their true needs are in our elementary schools in particular, with any small group instructional room, principals will be in touch with what that means, and no one will be moved out of the classrooms without prior notice about what that would look like. The same way that your child who might have an additional service being provided, you would know what that would look like as well in advance. The 6th grade classrooms will be grouped. How will they be grouped? The typical grouping is randomly with simply providing numbers. And in this case, which is not by last name or grade average. So again, it's a randomized grouping in the 6th grade classrooms. Question here about if it's possible to give the kids hybrid options, and the answer is no. And here's the reason why. Having a hybrid option resembles what we discussed earlier about being in some days and being out some days. And the reality is that our hybrid plan to reduce some capacity, being in the classroom is really no different than the current all-in plan and the hybrid plan, because social distancing is in place, barriers are in place, and masks are in place for both. The difference would be seen in some of the hallway congestion and arrival and dismissal. And so we do have mitigating factors, though, for those areas, with staggering, with, in the 6th grade, cohorting to reduce any movement in the hallways, and so we've already reduced the capacity during passing to almost resemble hybrid already. And so again, being in for some days and out some days is very much an impossibility for our teachers and our staff to handle, as well as for our administration to understand who's coming and going in our very important processes where there's potential for larger gatherings. When should children expect to receive their class schedules? It's a great question. I truly don't have an answer for you at this time. The answer is, frankly, you want the schedule at the last minute, and here's why. The last minute is when we are having our best information in hand. And so the longer time that we wait to give you your schedule, the greater chance we have to make adjustments to benefit your children. So I do ask for your patience with that. So a clarification is being asked about the small group instruction. And in the elementary level, if you had to take a few students out and bring them to another location. We do know that it does add a little bit more risk than if you simply were all in one class at all times. But it is the only way to make sure that we can get all of our children in at once. And being that we know that children are not going to be in attendance, and having to try to plan for this, it's impossible to try to say, we'll just simply add more teachers and make different sections and do that in a responsible way. And also knowing that we just need to get through the early part of the year to determine what comes next, where we may end up with a scenario that forces us to go to hybrid or all virtual at some point. And so once we have those final numbers, as we already know, there's far less than have been in our, I'll say, discussions or examples to you, we'll know more about what that looks like. Where will they be putting their coats and school bags? The school bags are going to be reduced, and you would expect that your school bag would be able to fit only in a string bag the quantity of material. But again, more information will be coming from your building principals. Where will they be putting their coats? I'm going to respectfully defer any questions in regards to the colder months, simply hoping that we get there in being inside our buildings, and we'll figure that out a little bit later. If virtual learning doesn't work for your child, are you allowed to put a request for in-person before the second trimester? The answer is yes. You can put in a request before each marking period. Trimester is elementary, quarterly is secondary, and once again we say we need some time for those who want to come back to know that they're coming back and plan for them to come back, and at the same time we need some time for those that wish to go out to know that they're going out and how to best handle those that go out and how that impacts the plans for those that are in. Communication is going to be ongoing and likely much more detail-oriented than you had in the springtime, especially for certain classes. So please know that even the fact that on Monday night we had a corrupted YouTube link, so we got on a little late, and the fact that I was able to quickly text message all of our families that we had a delay, and then secondly where to go find the new link, and how quickly everybody responded, shows that we have better handle of our communication and how we were going to do that with our families, and that includes the use of our Google Classrooms. And now that Google Meet is able to be incorporated right onto Classroom, which is a new feature, that makes it much easier for teachers to share that information with students and parents. Question about how do we avoid the Georgia school photo in our passing at the high school? And the good news is, by having seen that, we're working really hard to avoid that. And that is a great question. And the answer is going to be with more time between classes and with masks required, which wasn't in Georgia. We're going to allow students to leave at certain times only, and other students will have to maintain their classrooms. And that orderly fashion is going to be followed, along with differences in the hallways being marked for certain directions and certain stairwells being marked for up and down. And of course another area in terms of having staff help facilitate. And so what's the maximum number of students allowed in a class? The answer is simply based on the different classes, so I can't answer that directly. In other words, however many fit with social distancing in place, every single room has been walked and staged individually, and so that varies from space to space. But all of our rooms maintain the 6 feet between our students at all times. We do not have standardized rooms in our buildings, so for me to say a certain amount of square footage equals a certain amount of students is not, it wouldn't be an accurate situation here. Again, the question about why can't another teacher be hired for the year is that, number one, we don't know what teachers we need. We don't know how many students it applies to. If we hired teachers and we don't need them, we are putting the district in a place that isn't sustainable. We need to get our year started. We have a plan where students are pulled out in the elementary schools. Students come out for small group instruction in a variety of times under normal circumstances. So this is not so out of the ordinary. It's just hard to imagine what it would look like. And most parents are currently thinking about that in terms of the maximum that would go into that extra room and make it another class. But we know that that's not even possible because there are so many that have already chosen not to come in at all. And that's what we're going to do in dealing with all of the parents who have spoken about their concerns. And we're not even sure, again, that these are going to be needed. Will the students be bringing backpacks and lunch boxes? Lunch boxes, we would suggest that they're not bringing lunch boxes as much as brown bags, but they'll be keeping them with them at their desks. There's some specific questions here about Charles Campaign parents from 4th grade. I've already spoken to 6 of those parents myself today. With most of the conversations have gone very well on understanding and some of the information that I just shared with all of you. And I'll continue to reach out to you individually. And so I'll respectfully put that issue of the Charles Campaign 4th grade to rest for the moment. Can I guarantee an in-person spot for all children who start with virtual and decide to rejoin at the end of the marking period? And the answer is yes, because I already guarantee it now, because all of our plans include the potential for 100% attendance. And so the need for the commitment is so that I can guarantee to make it work if you want to come back, because adjustments will be made if you start on virtual that I have to undo. And so we'll need time to do that. Thank you for that question. That's a good question. Okay, long question here about my 11th grader with on-site learning, like to meet his teachers, doesn't want to commit to staying in school. The issue with the commitment of people about being comfortable, we are fortunate, we're trying to be understanding. The real concern is that if your child shows up and then leaves after a week, you can be sure that there's going to be some heavy-duty bumps in the road for your child during that time that they turn over from in-person to virtual. So once again, I'm simply, if you have a serious issue, you're going to deal with your building principal. But I can't make a statement publicly that that applies to all about having that type of flexibility. But if you have certain needs, we're always willing to listen. If we now opt for in-person and later decide to go online, we still continue with same class teachers. As of today, if you were in person and you moved to online, you would be with the same teacher. Might that change if a huge influx of people go online? I don't know, maybe, but as of today, you'd be following with the same teacher. If you can scroll down for me a little further, please. We do have a seasonal allergy question, and can have good weeks and bad weeks, and if you have a bad week and it's allergies, that's going to be a tough decision in terms of the day-to-day. Thank you for that question. And what's going to happen is that our nurse is going to have information from you and possibly your doctor. And again, anybody who's sent home because of related symptoms will be able to get on with their class. It's not something that's meant to be long-term. It's something that's meant to be temporary rather than simply being at home without education. For students who have services such as speech or psychology, will those services be provided online? As I said earlier, all of our IEP mandates will be met in the building, and for those students who are at home on virtual, they will be provided online. How will teachers mandate and keep track of online classes to ensure our students are still learning to the best of their ability? That goes back to earlier when I mentioned about our period-by-period attendance, and that our attendance policy will be in place for our credit-bearing courses, that our grading policies will be in place. And so that mandate is a community effort, is something that we need our families and our students to all understand and agree with in conjunction with our teachers. Let's see, a couple other questions here in this instructional area. Will there be an orientation for the middle school and high school to get to know the flow of the school? Yes, we are working on our plans for orientations, and I have a meeting tomorrow with the principals to discuss where they are with that. We are eager to try to find an in-person orientation format that allows students to come in. Most likely we'll be asking parents to stay home, other than in kindergarten maybe. But at K, at 6th, and at 9th grade, so that students that are not familiar with the building will have an opportunity to get more familiar prior to arrival. Question about our classes and rotating out in overflow. And again, overflow may apply to all of our 5 schools, may apply at some point to all 5 of our schools, and all rotation will be equitable where each student it's applicable to. But in each of our elementary schools, the current plan is that only those in the one grade will be together, but not necessarily mixing. They'll be in portions of the room. And as you heard me say earlier in our contact tracing protocols and now definitions, just because somebody in a particular room is deemed infected doesn't mean that everybody is now deemed on quarantine. And so we'll be working with that within any of these plans. Can we be more specific about the mask breaks? I hope that was specific in terms of every class period, the teacher will allow a mask break, but at their instruction at the secondary level, and each elementary teacher will work to provide up to 2 mask breaks per instructional hour. Let's see. In wiping desks, are you allowed to send your children to school with their own wipes to wipe down a desk? The answer is probably, but we're looking into that. If we're going to open schools, I need to monitor temperatures at school, not at home. People will do this at home, and then they'll not fulfill their obligation. Okay, again, in reconsidering that decision, once again, it's that very difficult task of bottlenecking all the students through a few entrances and keeping them away from each other upon arrival, which is very difficult to do on the exterior of a building. And that's why the recommendation is for you to do it at home as parents. To limit, because once we're in the building, we have a great time moving children quickly to their locations and then limiting their interactions. So if there's some place that has shown that they can do it, well, we absolutely will reconsider. We are open to all good ideas. But again, right now, the Department of Health has made it very clear that it's highly recommended, that we do this at home. What happens when parents send their kids to school sick? This is obviously why we mention on numerous occasions how much we need all of you to work alongside of us. And what happens when they send kids to sick before, unfortunately, will happen now when they send their kids to school sick. And we just simply hope that that's not the case. We do know, though, that when students are exhibiting symptoms in school, we are going to be sending them to an isolation area. Many more parents are going to get called with many more symptoms than are typical, because everyone will be on very high alert, and many more doctor visits are going to be required in order to get clearance that the symptoms are, in fact, not related to COVID, and that students can come back to school. Can you scroll up for me, Mr. Choi, please? What classrooms have common? We mentioned a question about maximum capacities. I think I mentioned that already. And yes, there'll be, in areas that are more common, there'll be social distancing signage all over the place.
Washing hands.
Ventilation in classrooms, we mentioned, yes, there are going to be circumstances, very hot, rainy, that are going to make it more challenging. But again, that's the best of the current circumstances that we have. The physical markers on the floor to encourage social distancing. We already have that in a large number of areas in the high school due to our extended school year program. And every one of our elementary schools in particular already has a whole series of markings that are ordered and on their way to indicate to students about 6 foot distancing. Our principals have already secured for our youngest students, for example, like they do at camp or in preschool, those long ropes where they have your marking that you hold on to so that the class can move throughout the hallways uniformly, carefully. And we know that young kindergartners and first graders are made like magnets where they want to bang into each other, and we know how challenging that's going to be, so we're already working on strategies to help mitigate that. I'm going to ask the person who sends the questions regarding the filters and the different types of filters. I am going to ask you to please email me, and I'll forward that separately to Mr. Harrington, who's going to have to do some research to dig into that. It's not something that I have information to share with you more than I shared last night. And regarding ventilation, I'm confirming that air conditioners will be off unless deemed necessary for a medical condition, yes. Which, by the way, though, in the end is what all air conditioners are installed for. So there are very few situations I can imagine where that won't be the case. Well, elementary and middle schools allow students to wear masks with face shields and mask lanyards. Mask with face shields, I'm not sure what that is, differently than a typical mask. If that means the mask with a clear section, that's fine. Mask lanyards to help make sure the masks stay with you, no problem. Thank you for that question. We haven't heard that before. We'll add that to a conversation with the principals about that. I don't see a problem with that. Can the desks in alternate academy instruction be wiped down? Again, we're intending to clean everything as much as possible. We just don't want to promise you something we can't do, which is when students are changing classes, desks can't be wiped down every single period of every single day. Again, the medical advice, which of course includes cleaning, is more heavily laden with hand sanitizing, hand hygiene as being a greater factor because the transmission from surfaces is very, very small. And though I know that doesn't comfort everybody, having all of the measures in place reduces all of that risks. Okay. I was curious why the older kids, 8th grade, need to switch and 6th graders do not. So the difficulty here is that in our 7 to 12 program, there are many more choices and pathways for our children in different levels of courses and different electives of courses. And so to maintain the integrity of the academic program, which in the end means also opportunity, and knowing that we don't know how long this can last in terms of being in person, we felt that the compromise of reducing the hallway movement in 6th grade, but having 7th and 8th and then 9th through 12th follow their typical academic program was simply necessary under the current conditions. That trying to build something that looks like a 6th grade program with honors classes, with variety of foreign languages available is simply impossible without destroying a portion of that program. And so that was the very tough decision on where to compromise. And that, again, knowing in all of this that 100% of our plans are going to disappoint 100% of you, because none of them fulfill all of the things that we desire. And that's painful for me to have to say, because we all work so hard to try to provide you and your children with the greatest experience possible. And none of these experiences are going to be exactly with what we had. And we simply hope to be in the closer to regular version, of which is where we are currently, to what we had, before having to go to the versions that are even further away. Okay.
Technical difficulty.
Whoa.
Our cam went off.
I see power. Cord is power.
Yeah, nothing was touched. It still has your audio. Do you want to?
Okay, sorry folks if you can't see me. It seems that something happened on the live stream, but it seems that the audio is still going. Sorry about the interruption. Taking a look at, again, some of the questions there. There's a question about, where was it? Hold on one second. I'm sorry, I got distracted. Okay, in terms of dismissal, especially at our elementary schools, like Charles Campaign, this question asked, if it's slightly staggered at different exits, there'll be some bottlenecking. Yeah, we know that arrival and dismissal is going to be quite a bear to handle. And so again, your principals have listed some of those in your plans. So if I simply would refer to those for you, please. I don't have that information for me to share. We're back on the video. Oh, sorry. Here we go. On the video side. If a student tests positive with our classes switching and our close contact issues and dealing with our Department of Health, you can leave that up, it's fine. If that's, don't mess with that. The answer is really going to be determined by the Department of Health. And that includes the next question saying that the New York State Ed Department still says schools must close for 24 hours if there's one confirmed case. And you, Mr. Arrington, you're not sure?
SCD? No.
Yeah.
No, that was the guidance back in March.
That was the guidance earlier, and currently that's not what I believe is in the current guidance.
Correct.
Oh, great question about fire drills and lockdown drills. How they're going to be handled. So our safety drills, the New York State Ed Department has made accommodations and provisions for our safety drills in the following way. You still have to have them all, but if you're going to have fire drills, you don't have to have everybody go out together or at the same time. But you do have to make sure that everybody gets the required 8 safety drills, fire drills, at some point. So if you only sent out 2 or 3 grades knowing that you'd make it easy for them to avoid each other in the halls and go outside, then you'd have to do more drills during the course of the year. On lockdown drills, when they take place and where we normally send our children into a particular area of the classroom, they have said that we can now simply conduct the lockdown drill and discuss where they'll be going, not actually gather them. And so that's important to note, that all safety drills will still be conducted, but with modifications. And so yes, students will be required to wear a mask within the classroom, even with a barrier. Okay, those questions we got to earlier. How will students be able to communicate with each other in classrooms? That's going to be, again, a challenge. And in terms of students making friends, we know it's going to be much harder than it would be normally, but having them in school will be easier than having them outside of school. So I don't have a specific answer on how to do it. The teachers will be working on ways to incorporate social emotional learning in their classrooms for those positive interactions between peers. Will hand sanitizer be available in the classrooms? Yes, every classroom to go in and go out. We'll be instructing them to handle that. Looking at transportation, Will buses for special needs students have social distancing? The answer is no. They will still be required to wear masks as much as possible. Yeah, we do know the opting out of transportation will create some potential issues at our buildings. The answer to those arrival and dismissals, as I mentioned earlier, though, are going to be determined once we figure out how many students are actually coming. And does that correlate to those that aren't taking the bus plus those that are staying home? What are we really talking about? I'm not certain yet. But yes, we do know that may be some added traffic at both arrival and dismissal. Can you scroll up for me there, please, Mr. Choi? It's more arrival, dismissal, recess. Yes, have any plans been made for when kids can go outside for recess or gym? The answer is all recess and gym will be outside, as I mentioned earlier, but we are talking about getting our teachers to take our kids outside far more frequently than just that. And we will communicate that with you when we get closer. You know, for example, in the end, classes can go outside to conduct class and bring their book or whatever it may be. And we want to get them up and moving and out from behind their desk and barrier and out from behind screens as often as we can. Children will be allowed to use the playground equipment, and we will clean it as often as possible. Driver's ed question, the 12th grader not completed driver's ed. Oh, if they have not completed driver's ed, if they were in driver's ed, we made a provision available, and all the students that wanted to were able to complete it this summer, and they finished that last week. And so if you have questions about driver's ed, that somebody who started, then you should be calling Mr. Healy or Mr. Jans to figure out what happens. We've been communicating with families to let them know I arranged for us to work at the Town of Oyster Bay pool to complete that. Mr. Hack completed that for quite a number of students. Oh, shoot. So sorry. Long day. I'm confusing lifeguarding and driver's ed. When is driver's ed continuing? It is not. We have no idea. They've only recently allowed driver's ed to even be discussed. They were not allowing anything with virtual learning of driver's ed. Mr. Healy is still Mr. Healy. Mr. Healy will be in touch, though, with that. Sorry I don't have more information and for the confusion. Lunch, we will have more tables outside to let kids outside to eat as much as possible. And at this time, we are still allowing seniors to leave for lunch. Remember, everything is subject to change. We don't have the capacity to have seniors here. The building has never had capacity for the seniors, so for more than 50 years, seniors have been able to leave for lunch because they love to do it. We like them to have that independence, but we also know that we need them to do it for the capacity issues. We were planning to be cleaning the lunch areas between periods. School pool is going to be open in any capacity, not at this time. We don't have any indoor pools being opened under the current conditions. And extracurricular activities and sports and clubs are currently on hold until further notice, as I mentioned earlier. Sports are delayed until at least September 21st. And extracurriculars, which generally don't start until a couple of weeks into school, will be evaluated once we get into school and how things are moving, and before we decide which, if any, extracurriculars will take place. The high school will not be relaxing their attendance policy in this question, because once again, if you are home and you're on virtual learning, you will be required to sign in and have your attendance taken each period with your teacher, because that is a requirement that we have to have, period by period attendance for all of our students. And again, that's now connected to our attendance policy for our secondary, our high school students. So that is not being relaxed. Okay? At this stage, I do appreciate again all of your patience and understanding. Knowing that we are faced with a tremendous challenge, once again, we know that Bethpage will be in good hands in trying to accomplish it. But make no mistake, there will be many bumps in the road. Many times where we're going to need people's understanding and patience. Well, while we attempt to do things that have never been done before. This is different than the spring. Where the spring we were in true crisis mode. Where illness was all around us. Where job loss was rampant. And where the community suffering was in a different state than it is today. Not to diminish the current suffering, but to know that planning has now been put in place very differently for families, for the community, and for our schools. And so the challenges that we face are going to be on some of the day-to-day issues of teaching and learning, of social and emotional wellness, and of dealing with illness as cases arise, possibly outside of Bethpage, and concerns about what happens inside Bethpage. But again, if you can maintain all that you do on the outside in as positive a way towards these plans as possible, the longer we'll be able to maintain your children in front of us here who wish to be here in person. Because we again have a long 10 months ahead of us. And the learning that took place on the process of what happened during our closing in March has been taken into great consideration. And so we want to be prepared for all possibilities, and we believe right now we are. So I thank you all for your continued support of our schools. I want to wish you all a very happy and healthy remainder of the summer months while we continue to work diligently to plan for your students' return to us, either in person or in our virtual learning environment. So please remember to stay strong, Bethpage strong. And thank you once again. And again, further questions can always come to me or your building principals. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.